Imagine this scenario: someone you love, your spouse, gets flashed by a speed camera again. This isn't their first offence, and this ticket would push them past 12 points, which under UK law means an automatic ban from driving. They rely on that licence to earn a living. So they turn to you, calm and reasonable, and ask for what sounds like the tiniest favour imaginable. Would you just tell the authorities you were behind the wheel? Just 3 points. No harm done. It feels like the sort of small, forgivable lie that couples tell each other to smooth over a rough moment. But before you agree to anything, you need to understand what you'd actually be doing, because this is not a small matter at all. The instant you agree to take the blame, you haven't done someone a kindness. You've committed one of the gravest offences that exists under English law, the kind that lands perfectly ordinary, upstanding citizens behind bars. Not a fine. Not a few more points on a licence. Actual prison time. I want to walk you through why that's true, how people who try this almost always get exposed, what sentence you're realistically looking at, and the one thing you should say if somebody ever asks you to do this for them, because this favour is really a trap dressed up as loyalty, and it has wrecked careers, ended marriages, and stolen people's freedom. My name is Adam King. I spent 15 years working as a defence solicitor in police stations and courtrooms throughout England and Wales, and during that time I watched decent, ordinary people, folks with completely clean records, get sentenced to real prison time for exactly this. What follows isn't formal legal advice. It's the warning I wish somebody had given every driver in this country long before they ever said yes to a request like this. Let's talk first about why the temptation exists, because I genuinely understand how people find themselves in this position. Under UK law, accumulating 12 penalty points within a 3-year window classifies you as a totter, and once that happens, the court is required to disqualify you from driving for a minimum of 6 months. For many people, that ban doesn't just mean inconvenience, it means losing their job, their paycheck, possibly even their home. So when that 12th point is about to land, the panic sets in, and shifting a few points onto someone else's clean license, a spouse, a parent, a friend, sometimes even a boss, can feel like nothing more than shuffling paperwork around. 3 points moved from one name to another. Who's actually hurt by that? That assumption is exactly what destroys people, because the legal system doesn't see it as harmless paperwork. It sees a lie deliberately fed to a court, and it responds to that with a level of severity that catches almost everyone off guard. So let's name the offence plainly. It's called perverting the course of justice. When you claim that somebody other than the actual driver was at the wheel, you're not just fudging a form, you're injecting false information straight into the justice system itself. You're corrupting the mechanism society depends on to determine accountability. And the courts guard that mechanism fiercely, because if people could freely lie about responsibility and pass blame around like a hot potato, the entire system would fall apart. That's precisely why perverting the course of justice isn't treated as some minor traffic infraction. In its most extreme form, it carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. Life, for 3 points. It might strike you as excessive for what began as a driving issue, but consider it from the court's perspective, because that context matters. Every one of these lies burns police and court resources. It penalizes the honest driver who accepts the consequences of their own actions, while letting the guilty party slip away unscathed. If courts treated this lightly, then anyone with a partner who has a clean license would simply do the same thing, and penalty points would become meaningless as a deterrent. So the judiciary has made a conscious, consistent choice to punish this harshly, because a deterrent only functions if people are genuinely afraid of the consequences. It's meant to scare you. And honestly, let it. A basic point swap sits toward the lower end of the severity scale for this crime, but here's the detail that blindsides nearly everyone. The court's starting position for this offence is immediate custody. Prison, right away. It doesn't matter if you've never had so much as a parking ticket before, if you're a nurse, a school teacher, a company director, or a loving parent. Senior courts have repeatedly stated that crimes like this are so damaging to the integrity of justice that only truly extraordinary circumstances will spare someone from an immediate custodial sentence. In actual cases, people with spotless records and no prior offences have received sentences of 4, 6, even 8 months in prison for taking on 3 points that weren't theirs. So the next time someone insists it's just 3 points, the honest answer is that it's potentially their liberty, their career, and their reputation, all on the line at once. And if you're thinking this only happens to people without the money for a decent lawyer, let me tell you about the country's most notorious example, because it proves the exact opposite. Chris Huhne was once one of the most influential politicians in Britain, a sitting cabinet minister. Back in 2003, he was caught speeding, and rather than accept the points, he convinced his wife, Vicky Pryce, a highly respected economist, to tell authorities she'd been driving. A tiny deception between spouses. It stayed hidden for roughly a decade. Then their marriage collapsed, and in the wreckage of that breakup, the truth surfaced. In 2013, both Huhne and Pryce, two of the most privileged, well-connected, well-advised people you could imagine, were sentenced to 8 months in prison over 3 points from a decade earlier. If wealth and status couldn't shield them, they won't shield anyone, because the courts view this as a direct assault on justice itself. Don't make the mistake of assuming Huhne and Pryce were an unusual case simply because of their fame. Across ordinary magistrates and crown courts nationwide, the exact same sentences get handed down to people whose names you'll never read in a newspaper: nurses, teachers, delivery drivers, small business owners, grandparents. I've personally watched it unfold, a hard-working man with an unblemished record who years earlier had taken points on behalf of his wife, standing pale-faced in the dock while the judge explains, almost regretfully, that despite his good character, the law leaves the court little choice but to send him to prison. The only reason you've ever heard of Huhne and Pryce is their celebrity. The punishment they received is entirely typical for this crime, and that ordinariness should worry you far more than their fame does. It isn't the exception. It's the norm. Now here's where people consistently make the fatal mistake, assuming they'll never get found out. In reality, these schemes unravel far more often, and far more easily, than most people expect. Let me explain the ways people typically get caught, because once you understand them, you'll see just how flimsy this lie actually is. The first vulnerability is the paperwork itself. When a vehicle is caught by a camera, the registered keeper receives a notice of intended prosecution, along with a legal demand under Section 172 of the Road Traffic Act requiring them to identify the driver. This is a statutory obligation. You're legally required to name the driver, typically within 28 days. Think about what that means. To pull off the swap, somebody has to write a false name on that document and sign their name to it. That's no longer a casual fib, that's a formal false statement made in response to an official legal demand, and it becomes documented, signed evidence sitting in a case file with your handwriting on it. The second vulnerability is that the story often just doesn't hold together under scrutiny. Police and courts have the ability to verify where the real driver was at the time. Employment records, work rotas, clock-in systems, CCTV footage, automatic number plate recognition cameras tracking vehicles across the country, even mobile phone location and cell tower data. If the person who supposedly took the points can be proven to have been 50 miles away at work, out of the country, or provably somewhere else entirely at the moment the camera flashed, the whole story collapses, and suddenly you're not just someone who was speeding, you're someone who lied to a court. But the third way people get caught outpaces every camera and database combined, and it's painfully simple. It's the fallout from broken relationships. Most point swaps happen between people who are close, couples, family members, friends, an employer and their employee. And relationships don't always stay intact. Couples split up. Friendships end badly. Employees get fired. When these bonds break down, the person who took the points, or the one who asked for the favor, very often ends up telling someone. Sometimes it's driven by anger, sometimes guilt, sometimes it just slips out in the wrong conversation with the wrong person. That's exactly what unraveled Huhne and Pryce's secret. 10 years of silence, undone by a bitter divorce. Here's the part that should really give you pause. There's no statute of limitations on this. It doesn't fade away after a few years. A lie you told to help someone in 2020 can resurface in 2030 with a police officer knocking on your door, long after you assumed it was forgotten. And once that suspicion reaches a police desk, understand this isn't treated as some minor parking dispute, it becomes a full criminal investigation. You could be asked to attend, or even arrested for, a police interview under caution, where every single word you say becomes evidence against you. At that point, you're stuck with an awful choice: keep lying, this time directly to police officers, digging yourself into an even deeper hole with fresh charges piling on top, or tell the truth and effectively confess to the very crime being investigated. There's no clever way out of that interview room, because the trap was actually set years earlier, the moment a false name went onto that form. Which is exactly why the only genuine protection is never creating the lie in the first place. While we're on the subject, there's a closely related trap worth mentioning, because it snares just as many otherwise honest people. It's called fronting. This happens when, in an effort to lower insurance costs, a family lists the wrong person as the primary driver of a vehicle, say, listing a parent as the main driver of a car that's really used by their teenager because it makes the premium cheaper. It might feel like simply outsmarting an overpriced insurance system, but it's actually a false declaration to your insurer, and that constitutes fraud. It carries two serious consequences. First, you can end up with a criminal record over it. Second, and this is the part that truly devastates families, if there's ever an accident, your insurer can legally refuse to pay out because the entire policy was built on a false statement, leaving you personally on the hook for a claim that could total hundreds of thousands of pounds. Same category of mistake, a small lie on a form that seems trivial but absolutely isn't. There's one more version of this trap I need to mention, because the pressure behind it is even tougher to resist: the workplace scenario. A manager pressures an employee into taking points for a company vehicle, promising to look after them in return. The employee, worried about job security, feels they have no real choice but to comply. Please hear this clearly: it makes no difference whatsoever that your employer pressured you, or that you felt cornered into it. If you're the one who signs that form, you're the one who has committed the crime, and you're the one who ends up in prison, not the company, and not your boss. No job is worth risking your freedom over. An employer asking you to do this is asking you to gamble everything you have just to spare themselves a minor inconvenience. And when it all falls apart, the consequences will land squarely on you, not them. So what should you actually do? Let me be direct about it. If you were driving, you accept your own points. Every single time, no exceptions. That's the entire rule, and it will never steer you wrong. If your license genuinely is at risk because you're approaching 12 points, there's a legitimate, legal route available to try to keep it. You can go before the court and argue what's known as exceptional hardship. You can demonstrate to the magistrate that losing your license would cause hardship far beyond what's typical, whether to you or to the people who depend on you. Courts genuinely have the authority to reduce or waive the ban in these circumstances. Exceptional hardship is a real, winnable argument when the circumstances genuinely support it, but it needs to go beyond the ordinary inconvenience everyone experiences from losing a license. Losing a job that leaves you unable to feed your children or keep a roof over your head. Being the sole person able to get a disabled relative to essential medical appointments. A small business that would fold entirely and take other people's livelihoods down with it. Those are the kinds of circumstances a court will seriously consider. Present that case honestly, with proper evidence, in open court before the magistrates, and whatever the outcome, you'll walk out with your record intact and your freedom completely secure. That's a fight worth having, unlike trading a 6-month ban for what could become an 8-month prison sentence. And if you're ever the one being asked, if your partner is sitting across from you asking you to take a few points on their behalf, the most loving thing you can do for both of you is simply refuse. Not harshly, but firmly. Tell them you love them, and that you're not willing to risk sending you both to prison. Suggest handling it the proper way instead. Saying yes doesn't actually protect the person you care about. It ties your freedom to their lie, and hands any future X or future argument the power to destroy your life entirely. If this information has been valuable to you, take a moment to think about how easily this trap could catch someone you know, and consider sharing what you've learned so they can recognize it before it's too late. Let me pull this all together. Taking someone else's penalty points isn't a favour, and it isn't harmless paperwork. It's perverting the course of justice, one of the most serious offences on the books, and it routinely sends first-time, otherwise law-abiding people to prison for months at a time, with no expiration date on when the truth might catch up with you. It brought down a cabinet minister and his wife. The temptation makes sense. Losing your license is genuinely frightening. But there are legitimate paths forward. Take your own points, and if a ban is looming, fight it properly through an exceptional hardship argument in court. There's only one rule that matters here, and it will keep you out of trouble. Always take your own points, every single time.